I'm saying that it is possible to transcend several other barriers if you are very, very diligent. I mean, improvements and success is something that you cannot argue with. If you're really good at your job, you can't be ignored for a long time.
Hello and welcome back to the Superlawyer YouTube channel. Today we are honored to welcome Dr. Argha Kumar Jena. Sir is the Principal Associate at DMD Advocates and a distinguished international dispute resolution lawyer with close to a decade of experience across Europe, Asia, and Middle East. A former senior legal consultant at India's Ministry of Finance, he has played a key role in negotiating several bilateral investment treaties and shaping India's position at global forums like the WTO, UNCITRAL, and OECD. With a Ph.D. in international law and economics and an LL.M. from Humboldt University, Berlin, he brings deep cross-border insights to both litigation and policy. We are truly delighted to have you today, sir. My name is Anshi and I work as an associate with the Superlawyer team. At Superlawyer, we showcase inspiring journeys of legal professionals offering valuable insights to greatly motivate and benefit our readers, which is the young lawyers and legal community at large. Thank you for being with us today, and I request Divya ma'am now to please continue with the conversation.
Thank you, Anshi, for the introduction, and thank you, Dr. Argha Kumar Jena, for being here and giving us some time. I'm Divya Dwivedi. I'm Superlawyer team lead, and I work with Anshi, and I enjoy taking interviews of esteemed practitioners, I would say, like you, because we get to learn so much, and our learners look forward to understand so many aspects through which you have gone. And over these many years, you can share insights. And once again, most welcome. Thank you so much. And we'll start with the conversation now.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I don't do so many of public engagements in terms of interviews, but it's a pleasure to be able to contribute in whatever way in the learning of the subject.
Your profile is so intriguing. There are so many aspects to it that conversation cannot be short, but we'll try to not take too much of your time. But I'll start with the most important question that learners are looking forward to, and I believe that they'll learn too much through your academic journey, which involves full scholarship for your PhD in international law and economics from Rome, LL.M from Berlin. How did you not only get this, but excel also? And how did you plan to get through this trajectory? Because this is something which is very, very unusual, that you keep on constantly studying and getting your work experience as well. Please do shed some light and enlighten our learners.
That's a question that I have tried to answer over years. The answer to which I will try to summarize to the best of my ability. But I think I tackled it much like any other problem that I would face or any other problem that I encounter as a lawyer. And before I tried to embark on a journey which would take me farther away from home, I first understood home. So I started after completing my BBA LLB from Symbiosis in Noida. I went back to my home. In my last 1.5 years, I interned closely with the chambers of Mr. Abhijit Mitro, who is a senior advocate. He still is. And I truly admire how good of a mentor he was, because he was 25 years senior to me in the profession at the time. And he still accommodated me in his chambers. He allocated me, or he told his other juniors who were 5 to 7 years senior to me to involve me in their work. And as a taskmaster, that is what you require when you start off. And I think that is what taught me to learn or pave my own way of learning about how to go about any problem whatsoever. Because I would work with a senior advocate, but I would work from the ground up. Because by the time a matter reaches a senior advocate, it's no longer at a formative stage. And at your founding years, you need to understand disputes and legal advisory from the very formative stage of things. Now, cut 2 years, it is difficult for anybody in India with our education, no matter how prolific it is, to understand or comprehend a career in public international. So I got my first stint of being able to work on an international commercial arbitration while I was working with a law firm in Hyderabad. So I went to Hyderabad and I got the opportunity to work on a very low value dispute, but Luckily enough, because it was the amount in dispute and the amount of fees generated was not exorbitant, therefore it allowed me as a junior lawyer to cut my teeth into that kind of a thing. And it was international commercial arbitration. And while doing so, I realized, okay, I think this is something that I wanted to do because I always wanted to travel the world and I wanted to see other ways of doing things in life. So that was one of my formative ideas on which I built whatever I have today. And then I started looking for what are the practice areas of how to have an international life as a lawyer. And then I found, okay, international dispute resolution. It is arbitration. So I understood arbitration already during my time in Calcutta High Court or in Mr. Mitra's chambers. And I realized that, okay, arbitration now goes cross border. What to do about that? And fundamental questions insofar as what if an international tribunal or any tribunal who is not bound by Indian law passes an award? How will that be enforceable? That led me to the New York Convention or the Convention for Recognition and Enforcement of International Foreign Awards. So I think that it was always the questions I was asking myself continuously. And as a lawyer, I think it's very important to learn the skill of trying to learn or the skill of asking the right questions at the right time. And over a period of time, I think, because admittedly not a very long career of mine, I realized that while I was studying at Humboldt University, which is again, it allows you freedom of thought. And it's a double edged sword. We can get lost in our own freedom of things, or we can try to find a direction in it, for which I again keep saying that mentorship is probably one of the core things of any lawyer's journey. So the first 6 months of my LLM was quite intensive. And we had to study all the core documents, all the core materials to understand what international law is, what international commercial law is, how commercial transactions and relations operate in a cross border context, and what are the disputes that could arise, some of the fundamental things about how to tackle them. And of course, then that prepares you to ask the questions which have not been answered. So, luckily enough, my university in Germany had many curated lectures of practitioners and other people that we would go and attend. And then again, like I said, asking questions is one of my, I think, is one of the things that I enjoy, and it can be annoying to a lot of people. So I ask a lot of questions in many places, and especially in forums where I have the mic. And I remember attending a lecture by one of the associates of a law firm that I ended up working in Berlin. And he was, of course, a much senior person. And I asked him a few questions. And of course, he remembered my face because I asked him a few questions. And a few questions that probably was slightly on the controversial side. And not going into more details, but after the lecture, I went and had a conversation with him. And I said, I think I can try to add value to your team. And semester end was coming in. So I told him that I would really appreciate if you would give me an opportunity to just apply for an internship. And it was a foreign land. I did not know anybody. I had no opportunities. I just had a master's program. And he ended up calling me for a coffee in his office. And that's how these internship interviews generally are, I am given to understand. So I went for a coffee to his office. I did not understand at that point it was supposed to be an interview. But he asked me a bunch of questions and I ended up answering them. And then he said, okay, we'll take you on as an intern, but we will not pay you as an intern. So I said, okay, fine, let me do that. But I said that, with all due respect, I wanted to not do it for more than a month because I'm also an immigrant student. And it's a core reality of things when you leave home so far away. And I mean, we come from India. We are not people, even we are in the middle class or so, we are not people who are taught to be hyper affluent. So I then got the opportunity. In doing so, I found that after a month, I could add value. They saw something in me. And then I got a 1 year contract as a research associate to be hired in the firm. So I worked alongside my last 6 months of my LL.M journey to work in that law firm. And because I was writing for the first time in my life, I was writing my master thesis on investor state arbitration. And this is something that I was not familiar with before I went to my master's. I was writing my master thesis on that. Luckily enough, the firm was doing their first ever investor state arbitration for the Republic of Croatia. And I was lucky enough to work on a proceeding of a sort. And from there, I met my next mentor because he was a legal expert in that case. And again, that was a 5 minute conversation over a glass of champagne in the office of Alexander and Partner where I was working. And then, of course, I took only 5 minutes of his time because I said, I've been writing a master thesis. I truly have some questions that I think an expert can give me some guidance on. And it was not a question with any agenda as to cultivate an opportunity. It was a question that I was truly facing. It was a question that I was deeply involved in. I wanted that answered because I wanted that answered as a lawyer. I wanted to write that answer into my thesis and I wanted to have put that to the test. So, in the pursuit of finding that answer, I asked him a few questions. He thought it was something that was worth answering. Then I got into a few conversations. Then the COVID hit, and we did not know what to do because life was falling apart in front of everybody's eyes. And my opportunity that was to be translated into a longer opportunity at the firm was retracted because of justifiable and very practical reasons. So when that happened, we realized that, okay, I have to find another way. I had 2 months of gap, and I don't shy away from saying this, but I don't have a lot of fake struggle stories. But those 2 months were probably the hardest months of my life that I can remember. I had no job. The contract at the law firm ended. I had to find something to do there. I had only 2 months of rent left in my bank account. And I delivered food for a living for a couple of months because that was the easiest job to find during COVID. And while I was doing that, the opportunity came from my mentor, my first mentor in public international law, which was Professor Dr. Stefan Hindelang. He was kind enough to give me something to start with. And I got that opportunity and I started out. And I worked on academic projects with him. We wrote impact assessment studies for the European Commission going forward. I designed courses for multiple universities that he was teaching in, ended up also teaching in universities thereafter, worked on several cases that he was involved in as an arbitrator and legal expert, advised on multiple cases, and things flowed on from there on forwards. But working with him, I realized that having a career in international law is slightly different in terms of approach. And public international law, private international law, things that are often thrown our way, but we probably don't understand the entire gamut of what each of these things encompasses. Funnily enough, while I was working on my master thesis, I had this topic in mind because I realized that there is no rule of precedence in international law. And however, I remember reading a very insightful article by Professor Dr. Michael Weibel. He's a professor at the University of Vienna. And of course, stalwart in public international law and investor state arbitration, so to say. And it was an insightful article where it showed that, okay, we don't have a rule of precedence in terms of bindingness in international law. But how does it go beyond what we understand as persuasive value of a path to dependence in understanding and interpretation of it? And that kind of got me to thinking, and this was during my master thesis again, some time back now, that I realized, okay, shifting of burden of proof. How does that happen in international litigation or international arbitrations or international adjudicatory methods, so to say, where who is allowed to prove what? How does that work? And what branch of law would that belong to? Questions which were probably academic in certain ways, because in practice, these questions don't have a lot of value. And working in a setup where I had 1 foot in practice and 1 foot in academia kind of allowed me to swivel back and forth and ask for insights from the worlds of either of these two places. It was then when I realized that public international law, as we understand it, in general requires a very deep academic insight, considering that the efficaciousness of the rule of precedence, if any, is volatile in practice. When it comes to international economic law, as we like to call it, issues in dispute concerns not only economic treaties, but its complex interactions with the branches of applicable national laws as well as commercial realities. In such instances, having cultivated the habit of interdisciplinary thought processes can certainly help in strategizing efficiently. I mean, as a lawyer as well. And something that I went on to work into is investor state dispute resolution, being a form of dispute resolution where effects of economic policies are often subject to adjudication by international tribunals. It requires one to understand macroeconomic impacts of such policies, also the measures, and analyze it within the contours of the facts and circumstances of a case. Now, dispute resolution mechanisms flowing from treaties are a herd of unicorns, as I understand, and within the fields of law, if at all. And hence, having a wider field of intellectual vision that one may require through interdisciplinary academic pursuits and exposure to multiple legal systems can most certainly help. However, I maintain that institutional education is not the only way of going about it. So my journey is a consequence of my choices, which I remain very happy about, but there are definitely different ways of going about it. Cutting to the PhD part, because I was working with Professor Hindela, I got to meet many people in the pursuit of academics. And so Professor Hindelang is also the executive chairman of Sealis Institute, which is the only European institute working on FDI screening to large extent, a field which is not a field of as much of a law as in India, because it's large in executive action. But in Europe and in civil law countries, screening of inbound FDI is a branch of law in itself that has legal and judicial remedies. And through that, I got to be introduced to Professor Sacco Ginevri, who became my supervisor. And luckily, again, he was a partner in a very big law firm in Italy and a full professor at the university. So then I realized that, okay, this kind of a career is possible, where you have very deep academic pursuits, but also practice related situations. Admittedly, finding a scholarship to do a full scholarship to do a PhD was a journey in its own. It was a full time job. And I had 1 year, almost a year, where I found the idea, the research gap, so to say. I explored it. I refined my proposal, got it critiqued from many people whom I respect their intelligence for, and then applied to 2 or 3 places and I got feedback from those places, detailed feedback. And I cannot stress more of how important this feedback was because they told me exactly how to think, or at least exactly not how to think. Different things in different places. And then the fourth application that I made, I ended up getting the full scholarship for, which was funded by the Ministry of Higher Education in Italy. And in Europe, if people are not aware, full scholarships to do your PhDs for the entire tenure of your PhD means full employment benefits. That means you have a monthly salary, you have social security requirements, which are taken out of your salary. You have unemployment benefits if you lose your job or you do not find an immediate job right after your PhD is done. And of course, it keeps you funded so that you can keep sitting, learning, and thinking. So the PhD scholarships are not exorbitant. They are just enough for you to have a basic life so that you stop worrying about bills and start studying. So that is how I looked at it. And that is how it worked out for me. But of course, there are multiple ways of doing a PhD depending on the kind of countries you choose into. For example, in Germany, it's a rule that to get an enrollment as a PhD, you don't need a scholarship. You need an agreement with a supervisor who's agreed to supervise your PhD. Then you can get an enrollment. Then you can start to apply for scholarships with foundations, which are political foundations or other foundations. India also has a very good organization called TAAD, where if you want to go for German PhDs or German masters, you can apply for scholarships that they have. So there are multiple floating scholarships from different entities, different bodies that one can apply to. And one can choose to apply for those scholarships after you've gotten the enrollment at the German university. Or one could choose to work on a project which is very highly funded or in any way funded at the behest of a professor who is doing an academic project. That is the second way of doing a PhD. And you can work on that project and in the process end up getting your PhD. And the third one is slightly more difficult one, is finding your own idea, and which is also required for the first process, finding your own idea, creating that proposal, and applying for funding, and getting that funding for the entire period, 3 years or whatsoever, and then doing your PhD, which is the third part, is what I ended up doing. But not because I was targeting only that. And to be very honest, I was wanting to do my PhD, but I ended up getting the third one. But I tried for all of them. You never know what you get, but you have to be convinced that the journey that you're doing or the journey that you're engaging into is something that holds meaning for you. For me, the pursuit of whatever questions that I was pursuing the answers for were meaningful for me. So that is what drove me to do whatever I did.
Wow, what a mesmerizing experience you have shared. And if I'm not wrong, Voltaire always said, never judge a person by his answers, rather judge a person by the quality of the questions that he makes. But that is something which is absolutely important. And thank you for bringing that up and you making your life around those questions. Because if you would not have asked the right questions at the right place, at the right time, the answers would be there, but maybe it would not have helped you in the similar fashion and helped us understand this aspect of asking questions, quality questions. They are something which give you that feel that, okay, I may get this answer, and it's amazing feeling. So keeping that feeling intact, how have you built your career around in these many years, like a decade, around Germany, Italy, and India now? The kind of cross-border transactions or the kind of cross-border legal practice that you do, especially in public international law, which you said that international law is something which is just taught. How have you made your strategies for global clients, keeping in mind that they have different variety of requirements? How have you garnered those beautiful questions that can be answered for your commercial arbitration or maybe contract negotiation or even building those contracts for those clients? So the whole strategy that you form with all this legal acumen that you have, we would love to understand that as well.
Okay, so a multi-jurisdictional exposure, I think that is what we are talking about here. And how did I strategize? I have a chronic disability to lie about these things because, if the students are going to listen to somebody who is talking about their experience, I don't want them to have the idea that there is a straitjacket formula about things. There isn't. The short answer is that there is no strategy. But also, the short answer is that that means you can build your own strategy. There are several things that everybody has access to. There are several things that people don't have access to. There are strategies that work for certain people and does not work for the rest of them, solely because we have to strategize with the pieces that we are dealt, the pieces that we have access to. And then the part of the strategy is to gain access to the things that you think are necessary, and then to understand what are the things that you have to do to gain that access. I think for anybody to create a game plan, and this is something that litigation taught me early on. If I had to build a case, I had to first see what evidence do I have, what kind of advice I can give. Not only involves a good understanding of what the legal gamut of things are, but also to understand what are the things that I can access on the basis of what I have in my hand or what is my client providing. Can I probe my client to get a few things out? Is he willing to go and do a few things to get me the evidence that I require? If it's an old cause of action, is he willing to go and dig deeper? If it's a company, do they have people who are liaising with me, who are working hard to find me the pieces of evidence that I require to build a case? Build a case meaning what? Build an argument. Different kinds of arguments for different kinds of things. So it is largely on the basis of what I have access to, the pieces that I have. What can I make of it? And for me, it was that. I did not plan to go and meet Professor Hindelang somewhere or whatever happened. it was a pursuit of something that held meaning to me. I thought I wanted to do this. So I was like, okay, at this point, I need to focus everything on finding what I can find to get my next step. That drove me to go and ask, because before I went into the German law firm I worked into, it was a boutique law firm. And before I had to get into that, I somehow managed to get into a internship opportunity. Then I worked very hard for the internship opportunity to convert it into something. Then through that, because of my genuine interest, I met somebody and I did something. And throughout the entire journey, the only thing I can remember as consistent is I was never there for the glory. I still am not. I was not there to find something to write on my CV. I was there to answer a few questions that I was genuinely chasing the answers for. And oftentimes it would turn out to be a very rudimentary question that I had no idea about. And sometimes it would be something that people would call insightful. But my pursuit was never really, or at least that's how I like to think of it, was never really for an adjective from the other side. I was never really chasing compliments. I was just trying to get a few answers that I was looking for. And I still try to, at least like to think that I still try to do that. And things come as a consequence, I think, because in the end, and I tell this to my junior as well, who works very closely with me, is that you have to find ways to be useful. You have to cut down somebody else's working time. That is consequently the thing that they're looking for from junior lawyers. So, are you good at proofreading? Are you good at finding the applicable law? Or are you good at just making a structure of the issues to be answered? Are you good at formatting a document perfectly after you see one? What exactly is it that gets you the next opportunity? Because there are skills that you're good at, and there are skills that you're not good at, and you have to go and learn. And that's what I try to do. That say, if I find something that I'm not good at, and I know that I have to kind of level up to do this, you don't get the skills overnight. I look for the opportunity to develop the skills. And that is essentially what strategizing at a student level or at an early career level would be like. Now I'm approaching the senior level of my legal career, so to say. And till now, what I can attest to is my junior life as a very junior lawyer. And that was that. I focused everything on trying to find what is it that I lack. And then the next thing is like how to gain that. And one thing that I learned from all of that today in hindsight is that we have to find a way to be useful to the person that we are working under. If I can reduce anybody's working time by 30 minutes by putting in my 3 hours or 4 hours and have my ability to do my background reading without talking about it, because you're given a task and you might have to read a few things to be able to approach that task. The question is it important enough for you to put that time in and not talk about it? And that is something I think was the only thing that is akin to a strategy, so to say. But the multi jurisdictional exposure happens because there are people who are willing to give an opportunity to people who are sincere and diligent. And you can transcend all of the other barriers in some way or the other. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm saying that it is possible to transcend several other barriers if you are very, very diligent. Which means if you made a mistake once and that mistake never is repeated in your course of work, people will take note. I mean, improvements and success is something that you cannot argue with. If you're really good at your job, you can't be ignored for a long time. I am not very, very good at my job yet, as I like to think, but I try to kind of not repeat the mistake that I note every day. And going through rejections and a bunch of other things, I think that's something very common in everybody's life. I'd like to think of myself as an average individual, ordinary individual with average intelligence, because I've failed more than I've succeeded. And I've tried to take stock of my mistakes. My mentors have criticized me heavily when I was working. And I realized at some point that silence meant a compliment. If I send a document and nothing came back, that's a compliment. So that's all about the strategy that I had, because I really did not have a full blown 20-year plan. I don't think I was smart enough to do that at that point.
You were totally humble when you were not bragging about the reading that you had to do to help a senior or anyone around for 30 minutes. It's something which shows how you were not following the glory, but the glory was trying to follow you. Because when you are not chasing it, it chases you. So that is something which you have shown, and the way you have explained things that you have done in your life. Probably that is the reason of you becoming principal associate at DMD at such a young age and through a very non-conventional way. Why do you think that happened? And how is it that you advise or you work with them with all your knowledge about technology or like multi-jurisdictional concepts that you have, the kind of complexities that you may have learned through years? What do you think that DMD saw in you? And what did you see in DMD to join them?
So this is another thing that I often say to people whenever I'm talking. I mean, this is another thing I'm very careful about unsolicited advice. Because, I try not to advise, I try to share, and I try not to generalize my experience. So, because my journey is my own, we all live in our own worlds. Because comparison in most circumstances is an exercise in futility. In a personal space, does not really garner much. There are people who are 10 times more successful in whatever way you want to define success, or much younger than me, and the other way around as well. So I don't think comparison is the goal. But in terms of what I saw in DMD, I was working in the government, and I learned a lot during my stint at the government, because I don't think I could have learned the things that I've learned in my time at the Ministry of Finance. I don't think I would have been able to learn that in any other job in the world that I could do. So it was a job, it was a unique experience in itself, dealing with delegations, thinking about the country's perspective. I enjoy living inside my head. And that job was wonderful to let you do that, because you have to imagine a whole world inside your mind to be able to advise. And at that point, technically and really, actually, and quite evidently, my client was the government of India. I had to advise the government of India on to do something at certain forums, whatever question. Now, the thing is, what kind of importance you assign to your own job or the questions that you're chasing is completely a personal endeavor. I assigned whatever importance I had to assign to the questions, and I tried to justify that importance in the terms of the effort that I would put in. And DMD Advocates was also very active in the international dispute space. Because I did not work in very big law firms in the beginning of my career, as you pointed out, I was wandering about here and there, doing different things. So the Indian legal market is that people would often ask questions like, "Oh, how did you do your job while you're doing a PhD? We'll consider only one." And then we have this funny acronym called PQE. And there's no definition of PQE. Everybody wants to look at PQE in their own ways. And I said that, okay, PQE, ask me about my experiences. I'll tell you. I'll tell you what I have done. And then you can decide whether it's useful for you or not. Then I quickly realized that conversations with HRs or hiring managers were not exactly the things that I was enjoying too much. So I fell back on what I did, that is, finding something through what I was doing. I found all my previous opportunities like that. And through one way or the other, in other forums, I mean, outside my realm of work, I came to know the managing partner of DMD Mumbai in one of the events. I just happened to talk to her. And I kept in touch. And she is, of course, a woman of her kind, and somebody that I consider my current mentor. And I just got to talk to her, and I thought that, okay, I think I want to get back to legal practice on a daily basis rather than advising in bureaucracy. I reached out to her and I said, "Ma'am, is there an opportunity? And if you don't have an opportunity at your firm, Can you direct me to somebody whom I might be useful to? And I had three. First conversation was about 7.5 minutes on phone. Second was about 10 minutes. And the third one was about 15 minutes. Three conversations on phone, after which she offered me an opportunity to move to Mumbai. So that was that, because as I tell you, I think when we are out of this system of law firms and we consider as a market of law firms, we think of it differently. We think, oh, it's an organization, because it is beyond what is a corporate veil. It is actually an organism when you get into an organization of things. And the organization presents itself in terms of a structure, and it tells you how to get into this structure. There are ins and outs and doing other things, and of course there are standards of doing things. Everything has a process, and there are something which we often think of as standards, although I don't like to think that there are, but there are certain things which are standard. But however, for me, I realized that those things have never really worked for me. I have never really done interviews, so to say. The only interview that I've done and I was successful at was my PhD scholarship interview. And beyond that, I've never really sat for an interview in a job, because, as I told you, in Berlin also, I was invited for a coffee and they put me at ease and asked me a few questions. And with Stefan as well, I just had a conversation over a glass of champagne, and he gave me a trial task. And then that got me something. And with my current mentor, Ms. Farishta Setna, she's the managing partner of DMD. I often go to her for advice, just non-law things. I said, ma'am, I'm thinking like this. This is technology. What do I do? I've had several insightful conversations, because I think it is only the fool who waits to learn from experience. You have to learn from the experience of the people who are already there. I mean, you will make your own mistakes. I definitely make my own. And I would like to think that I want to make the mistakes that others haven't. If that is possible, or as close to possible as that we can get to, is what my pursuit is, I would like to think. And so for me, again, summing up and coming back to the point, is it was not the organization. I looked for a mentor. I knew very well that when I'm back in India, about 14 months in, I needed a mentor, because I knew what having a mentor like Stefan did for me when I was there. I learned to ask questions, and the right ones, or at least the ones that I thought was right. And I learned how to deliberate. I learned how to criticize substantively. I learned to get rid of biases as diligently as possible. And that is a conversant, a very conscientious process to know yourself, to know your mind, to sever things or sever thought processes from your own pursuit of knowledge. That, I believe, is something very logical. I mean, a process that is also able to challenge itself. That is a continuous thing. It's a living organism inside your own mind. And to develop that is still my pursuit. I continue to think about it every day. I also tell my junior to please challenge me. I give her my draft and I said, find me my mistakes. Because somebody else can think the way that you can't think. And that is what my PhD, I think, I learned the most about, was being amongst intelligent people, surrounding myself people who I like to think are much smarter than me. And I would learn things from them continuously. And it would be something that would continuously inspire me to do something or the other, or keep me motivated to ask the next question. And mentorship is what got me into DMD, because I was not looking for a job, I was looking for a mentor. And when I talked to Ms. Setna, and of course, if this will be published, she will be able to see it some point if she ever makes the time. That is, yeah, I told her that, "Ma'am, I'm not looking for a job, I'm looking for a mentor." That's what got me into DMD, and what DMD saw in me, only she knows. I don't know.
So, as you rightly said, everyone has their own journey. They do make mistakes, they do overcome them. You also talked about differences and the different way that you chose and you became what you are right now and whatever God has planned for you for future. With those differences, now I would like to understand the kind of difference in the education system or the way you teach or the way the kind of teaching that is done in national and international universities that you have taught, we would request you to share some insights about the differences that you have seen and any way that you may have planned or worked around in order to make sure that you teach in every university in a similar style of yours, obviously, that you may have garnered over the years. Because what we have seen, or what I individually have seen, there is a huge difference in between the teaching systems as well. So if you don't mind, please do share some insights about that as well, because one has to understand through what kind of education system you have gone through and the kind of experience you may have had. Because as you have studied in Symbiosis, Noida, then you studied in Berlin, then you studied in Rome, you have seen so many different ways of teaching. We would request you to talk about that as well.
No, certainly. And I think this is probably my favorite question till now. It's something that I have thought about in several ways, because as you go through things, you're exposed to new things, and that kind of garners new questions. You notice things, and inevitably your mind engages into comparison in some way or the other. So, teaching styles, yes, I think the first thing I would say, I do not know whether it is demographic or cultural. What is the correct adjective for putting in this difference? But one of the things that I realized when I went to Germany is that attendance was never mandatory. So you come to class, you don't come to class, it's your business. I'm the person who's supposed to be responsible. And this is across undergrad, postgrad, and everything else. So attendance, like in Symbiosis, we had a uniform and attendance, and it's called law school for say. It's not just Symbiosis. I think it's across all law schools, all the good law schools, all the whatever tiers of law schools. I think in India we have a mandatory attendance, and I do not know where that comes from. I really don't know, and I do not know what is the rationale for that. To be very honest, again, this is something that I might not know today. I might figure out the rationale tomorrow. I don't know, but as of now, I haven't really understood that. But in Germany, one of the first things you realize is that, oh, no attendance. So I can choose when to come, when to go. And then somebody said, the professor will also not ask you if you want to leave in between the class. You could just, and to test it out, I even got up in the middle of a lecture and left. And I wanted to see what that happens. Into the lecture I was not enjoying too much. So I got up and left. And nobody said anything. It was quite normal. Coming in between a lecture, they said, okay, you can come whenever you want. But you can't expect the lecturer to repeat for you. Then, it's logical. It's a two-way street. The lecturer is responsible to teach you responsibly. It's your responsibility to learn responsibly. So it was kind of self encompassing, or like a self balancing system, or so to say. That's why I said I do not know whether it is cultural or demographic, because it might not work in India if you do that. Might be our entire education system's output might fall drastically if that happens. I don't know if that happens. I am not qualified to give that answer. So, however, that is the first difference that you visibly understand as soon as you're there as an Indian student. And the second thing, what was most visible, was the student to teacher ratio. The class sizes were very small. So, for example, I'll tell you, I studied the International Dispute Resolution LL.M. at the Humboldt University of Berlin. And there we had 25 people, and the maximum class size was 28. So they selected only 25 people. I mean, of course, they got much more applications than that, but they selected only 25 people because they wanted to select whatever. Now it has become, of course, way, way more competitive than it was when I went in. And out of the 25 people, I think we were from 21 nationalities. There were 25 people. So you suddenly get put into I mean, at least in my case, and I think if you do an international course in English, where the teaching, the medium of instruction is English, will generally be put into groups which are multinational. Instantly, you realize that you're faced with your own prejudice. Things which you think are normal are not normal in the groups that you're put in. The ways that you, and it's several things. It's not just educational, because education is like institutional education teaches you a few topics, But what you learn from it, the entire educational experience, is a cumulative of your peers, of your lecturers, of the teaching system, and everything else. So one of the first things was like this multinational group and the teacher student ratio. And in India, I remember when we were in law school, we were 65 people in our undergraduate class. And when I went to my master's, it was 25 people, as I said. And when I went into my PhD, we were six people, out of which three only had gotten scholarships. The others were paying to get their PhD program or paying for the PhD program. And then you realize that is one of the things. And this also, when I started, ended up teaching in places. And I have taught only masters, apart from some of the guest lectures I've given in India, which are to undergrads as well. And those were like in halls full of hundreds of students. And I was a little taken aback because I had not addressed that big of a crowd, because I taught mostly in Europe. It was largely a smaller group. I could entertain questions. I could ask them to challenge me. It was more conversational after. And of course, depending on the topics that I chose, I would structure my lectures differently. And in some of the places, because I worked for a professor, he also told me that, if I was lecturing for 2 hours, I would invest at least 10 to 15 hours to prepare for it, if not more. And because he was an expert, so maybe 10 hours, because he did his PhD and then rehabilitation through writing a book and postdoc and so on and so forth. Those are the immediate things that you want to understand. In terms of teaching methods, so I had the good fortune to teach a few lectures at Uppsala University, where my professor was also the director of the program there, of the LL.M program. By the way, it's the only LL.M program on investment treaty arbitration in the world. And so when I got to teach there, I realized that we were given instructions before I went to teach. So it was like, okay, this is our usual module. This is our teaching, and they called it PBL, problem-based learning. So then every lecture is followed by a sort of case study. Then we have an interaction session. So they had their entire structure accordingly, and we were informed of the structure and then said that, okay, are you amenable to this structure? Or if you want to do a different structure, you let us know, and we will inform the students accordingly. And again, so the attendance is not mandatory. So whether your lecture is interesting or not, you will get to know instantly. So that is, the students let you know. And so it's a task for the teacher. And I think that kind of pushed me to structure my lectures accordingly, because I was always concerned about practice oriented problems in law, not just academic ones, but I also enjoy academic ones. But I know what the limit of that is in my own mind. And that was one of the reasons. In terms of structuring of the LL.M program that I had, and I've compared notes with several of my peers who were doing LL.Ms at that point in time, I believe every LL.M has their own sign of things. They have their lectures, they have their projects, and the master thesis. I cannot stress more how important is it to not only have guidance for the master thesis, but also have guidance to choose a topic for the master thesis. Because most people won't go for a PhD, it's a tedious task. But if you are looking for a master's program, selection of topic for your master thesis is something which is the goal. In hindsight, I can understand that was the goal of the first semester. If you're doing a 1 year LL.M, the first semester, first 6 months is going and finding a master thesis topic that is actually relevant. You can't do that if you have no background. You need the guidance from the people who are there. So the guest lectures, paramount importance, because you actually get to hear people who are deep into it. And because international law or any sort of international law practice, call it private international law, public international law, international taxation, commercial disputes, contractual disputes, industry specific disputes, however be it, there are people who have spent a sizable amount of time in studying the academic part of it and then going into practice and doing both of them as a matter of living. And there are several of such people who are in the market to do so. And a good master's program kind of gives you access to them in the sense, access to their minds, and a few minutes later on to go and tell them that, I want your guidance. The opportunity to ask the questions. It's not just important to know how to ask the questions, it's also important to have the ability or the opportunity to ask the questions. And that is what I think a master's brings to you. And that is the point of choosing a very good master's or a reputed master's. And then you're a part of an alumni network, which spills over into your practice area. I mean, only in one of the projects that I was doing, I needed a person in a particular country to tell me or even find me some of the laws which I could not find on the web, no matter how much I tried. Because the internet searches are also domain based. In India, I cannot get the results what I would get by searching in, say, Tuvalu. That's the world's smallest country, by the way. So, any other country you go to, you can't really find those searches or the hits that you would get in any particular country because we have SEOs, the search engine optimization rules or processes that are done. Internet is no longer the internet that we grew up with. Internet is not unfiltered. Internet is orchestrated as well. So even for research, you require people. In my advisory, I could not find anything. What was my last resort to go back to my alumni network, remember a person from that country, text them, and then I said, I need some urgent help. We spoke 6 years ago. Can you help me on something? And this is my question. And of course, I often say this because I believe in giving back. So I often say this like, I will try to make it up to you in whatever way I can. And I am often told that you don't need to say that. We're peers. Of course, we're there for each other. But I believe that nobody's time or nobody's knowledge or nobody's effort should be taken for granted. I always try to remember to the extent possible and try to reciprocate to the extent possible if I have the means and ability to do so. So that's why I keep saying that. But yeah, coming back to the differential analysis of educational systems in Europe and India that I'm aware of, I think three or four of the points. One is, of course, the attendance issue. Number two is the student teacher ratio. And the number three is the method of learning in terms of daily immersive structures. And I think the last bit that I would say is understanding the meaning of what institutional educational systems are. Your undergrad is about letting you know about everything that exists, taste everything, and it's like a buffet. Go and have anything that you want and see what you like. Your master's is about choosing one field and one topic, and master thesis is about mastering that particular topic. And if you have a good mentor, you would have mastered that particular question or a few questions that you were asking. The PhD is the doctor of philosophy in any particular subject was about understanding a granular gap in the research that exists, trying to fill that, and in the process, trying to push the understanding of the field a little forward. And this, I think, is not merely a description, it's a way, it's a path, it's a roadmap. If you understand all of these words, if somebody tries to understand all of these words clearly, they will be able to find their own way of going about it, or even ascertain whether to go about it or not.
Thank you so much for being so humble in sharing this much knowledge. I really wish we could go on and on and on and extract more and more information about your experience and the kind of differences that you have seen. This is such a fulfilling interview. I feel like there are immense number of questions about international law, about how disputes are resolved, what kind of case studies do you do, how do you do, but we are restrained by time, and I really hope that we get to learn a little bit more from you if you get time, and it'll be our pleasure to host you once again. And it has been amazing experience that you talked about not only undergrad but LL.M, also PhD, the kind of mentoring that you seeked, and you did not seek for job but the mentor, and in return you got such beautiful stories to tell, the kind of challenges that you have encountered and the way you have overcome that. Amazing, Dr. Argha. It has been an immense pleasure to host you and have these questions answered. There are still so many unanswered questions, but we will keep it for some other day. But today it has been an immense pleasure for me to ask you these granular questions to get that particular essence of how you have done it and how our learners can learn from it. Thank you so much once again for giving us this much time today. Absolute fun.
Well, thank you for hosting me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell a few stories which I think hold meaning for me. And I hope somebody gets something out of it. Even if 1 minute was useful, I think my day was well spent today. And I would like to thank Anshi for reaching out to me. Thank you, Divya ma'am, for taking the time and asking me these questions, which also made me reflect for a few things. I mean, some of the things I did not even think about. So, good questions often make me think. So, thank you for making me feel so important. And it's a genuine pleasure. And I hope that your journey to enrich the students or any learner of the law and their journeys continue to reach new heights. Thank you so much. And I wish the very good evening and a wonderful remainder
Have a
of.
great evening, have a great life, and we'll be in touch. I really hope that people learn, even like you said, for a minute. That will bring in a lot of change. And thanks, Anshi, for bringing this beautiful, beautiful interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being with us. I personally got a lot to learn, and I'll definitely implement that in my practice and other parts of whatever I learned today as well. Thank you so much.